Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. The channel is going through a difficult time right now, and we really need your support more than ever. So let's try to get this video to 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching this video leaves a like and writes a comment, we can make it happen together. Thank you so much for your support. It truly means a lot to me. And now, let's begin. My grandmother raised me on two kinds of stories. The first kind had a moral. The second kind had a rule. The ones with a moral were the ones she told at the table with her hands busy. The boy who lied about the flood. The woman who traded her wedding ring for a bushel of apples and starved anyway. Those were for making a person decent. You could argue with those. You could roll your eyes at those. The ones with a rule she told with her hands still. Don't answer a whistle you can't see the mouth of. If a voice you love calls you off the trail after dark, it isn't the voice you love. Anything that can say your name can learn to say it better. I grew up in Randolph County, West Virginia, in a house that backed up against 900,000 acres of the Monongahela National Forest, and I want to be clear that I did not believe her. Not the way you'd have to believe something to change how you live. I believed her the way you believe in a draft in an old house. You notice it, you don't investigate it, you put on a sweater. Kids around here trade monsters like baseball cards. Mothman gets all the press because Mothman got a movie and a statue and a festival with a 5K. Flatwoods gets the tourists. Sheep Squatch shows up in the state park brochures now, which tells you everything about how much a thing has to be defanged before somebody will put it on a brochure. Bigfoot is everywhere and nowhere, a celebrity with 100,000 cousins. Nobody ever put my grandmother's story on a brochure. It doesn't have a name that would fit on a t-shirt. In our family, it was just him, or sometimes the tall one. And once, only once, when she was very old and very tired and had stopped filtering, she called it the borrower, and would not explain why. I became a ranger anyway. Backcountry, Monongahela, Wilcox District, 10 years this October. If you want to know why, it's the same reason everybody does it, and the same reason nobody stays. Because there is a morning in the second week of October, up on a bald above the Black Fork when the fog is sitting in the valley like milk in a bowl, and the ridgelines come up out of it in rows going blue and bluer, and finally the color of an old bruise. And the sugar maples are burning, and you are being paid, badly but paid, to be standing there. 10 years, and I've never once been able to describe that to a person who hasn't seen it. I've stopped trying. I just tell people the health insurance is decent. The job is not that. The job is 98% trash, toilets, and trauma. Trash you'd be amazed at. Toilets I won't get into. Trauma is mostly cardiac events on trails that people underestimated, and ankles on trails that people overestimated, and twice a year on average, somebody who walked off the map. You learn things doing this work that don't make it into the training. You learn that the first 90 minutes matter more than the next 90 hours. You learn that a person who's lost goes downhill, always downhill, because downhill is easy, and easy feels like progress. You learn that a lost child hides, and a lost adult walks, and that's why we find the children later and worse. And you learn the other stuff. The stuff the old-timers hand you in pieces, sideways, never all at once, never anywhere with a witness. Cass Renko trained me. 29 years in the district, hands like tool leather, could read ground the way a priest reads a face. She gave me the trash lecture and the toilet lecture and the hypothermia lecture, and then, about 8 months in, while we were eating cold sandwiches on a downed hemlock in the Sorrow Creek drainage, she gave me a different one. Don't work this drainage alone after dark, she said. That's not a rule. It's not in a manual. It's a favor. I asked her what was in the drainage. She chewed for a while. Then she said, "Nothing's in the drainage." Cass, "There's nothing in the drainage," she said, "and I'd like it to stay a stranger to you." That was the whole conversation. She retired 6 years ago. She moved to Ohio, which, if you know anything about people from here, is a sentence with a scream inside it. Nobody moves to Ohio on purpose. Nobody from a place like this leaves the ridges unless the ridges have started to feel like a thing standing behind them, I've got a lot of stories from 10 years. Most of them are funny. The man who tried to bathe in a spring box. The bachelor party that got separated from its pants. The woman who called 911 from the top of Hollis Knob to report that she was spiritually lost. Which, I want to be fair, she was. This one isn't funny. This one is the reason I sleep with a light on and a shotgun by the bed and the radio scanner running all night. And the reason my husband finally asked me, gently, in the kitchen, in February, if I would please consider talking to somebody with an office. I did talk to somebody with an office. I told her about the 3rd of October 2 years ago and about Sorrow Creek and about what I brought out of the Ivy Gap mine. She was kind. She used the word processing about 11 times. She gave me a worksheet. So instead, I'm writing it down, the whole thing, in order, the way it happened, because I've come to believe that the only thing that ever actually helps is a record, not for me, for whoever's next, because there will be a next. October 3rd. I remember the date the way you remember a birthday. It had been a dry September, which matters. Dry September means low water, which means people go places they shouldn't because the crossings look friendly. It also means the leaves come in dull and go fast, and every ranger in the district gets tired of tourists asking us, personally, as though we're in charge of it, why the colors aren't doing much this year. I was running the Black Fork Loop Patrol out of the Wilcox Station, alone, which was normal. We were 2 people short and had been since spring. Around 10:40 in the morning, dispatch put out a call for a welfare check that turned into an overdue party report before I'd finished writing down the address. The reporting party was a woman named Hazel Deal, calling from a rental cabin off Ivy Gap Road, on the far southern edge of the district where the National Forest hems in a leftover checkerboard of private land, old mineral tracts, and about 40 cabins that all have names like Rustic Retreat and Bare Necessities and go for $280 a night in leaf season. Her sister's party was 3 days overdue, not 3 hours. 3 days. I want to sit on that for a second, because it's the first thing that was wrong. People are overdue all the time. Overdue is our bread and butter, and it is almost always nothing. They went out a different trailhead. They extended a night. They got to a summit and got service and called a friend instead of a spouse. Overdue by 6 hours is a phone call. Overdue by a day is a knock on a door. Overdue by 3 days is a search with a helicopter in it. And it should have been reported on day 1 by a frantic person at 3 in the morning. It was reported at 10:40 a.m. on day 3, calmly, by a woman who apologized twice for bothering us. I drove down. It took an hour and 10, most of it on Ivy Gap Road, which is 9 miles of gravel that the county maintains in the sense that a person maintains a houseplant they've forgotten the name of. The cabin was up a switchback drive, cedar-sided, a hot tub on the deck with the cover half off and rainwater in it, a rental management sign screwed to a post. Hazel Deal met me on the porch, late 40s, cardigan sleeves pulled down over her hands even though it was 65 degrees. Her face had the particular slackness of somebody who hasn't slept and has decided to stop pretending she's going to. I introduced myself. Ranger Wren Callahan, Wilcox District. "I'm sorry to make you come all the way out," she said. "Ma'am, that's the job. Tell me about your party." 3 people. Her sister, Ray Deal, 41. Ray's son, Isaac, 15. And a family friend named Dale Furby, 50-something, who'd organized the trip and was, in Hazel's words, the one who knew what he was doing, which is a phrase that has preceded roughly 1/3 of the body recoveries I have participated in. They'd left the cabin on the morning of September 29th for a 4-night backpacking loop, out of the Tanner's Fork trailhead, up over Hollis Knob, down into the Sorrow Creek drainage, camped 2 nights along the creek, then a big day out over the ridge and back down to the cars, due back the afternoon of the 3rd of October. "That's today," I said. Hazel looked at me. "Ma'am, today is the 3rd. She went and got her phone and looked at it for a long moment, and I watched something behind her face come loose. "I thought it was the 6th, she said. I've thought about that moment more than almost any other part of this, because here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Hazel Deal had lost 3 days. She was not drunk, not high, not concussed, not a liar. She had been alone in that cabin, And she had gotten up and made coffee and read a book and gone to bed, and she had done it in an order and account that did not match the world. And the mismatch was in the direction that meant her sister had been out there less time than she believed, not more. At the time, I filed it under stress. Cabin with no cell service, no TV, a woman waiting, days smear. But the days smeared in a way that made her wait longer. Something wanted her to wait longer. I got the details I needed. Vehicle descriptions: Dale's white Tundra with a topper, Ray's blue Forester, gear colors which nobody ever knows and Hazel actually did. Isaac's pack was orange, Ray's was gray with a red lid, Dale had one of those old green ones with the metal frame. Medical: Ray was on a beta blocker, Isaac had a rescue inhaler he never used, Dale had a knee. Experience level: Dale, a lot. Ray, some. Isaac, none. Communication plan: Dale had an in-reach satellite messenger. He was supposed to check in nightly. Did he? I asked. The first 2 nights, Hazel said. Then nothing. Do you have the messages? She had them. She'd forwarded them to her own phone. I read them standing on that deck. September 29th, 7:52 p.m. Maid sorrow kie. Water low, but fine. Kid is a champ. All well. September 30th, 8:14 p.m. Layover day. Beautiful spot. Ray says hi. All well. Then nothing on the first, nothing on the second, nothing on the third. 2 check-ins, both ending with the same 2 words, which is the kind of thing a certain sort of man does. A little verbal handshake and then silence. Ma'am, I need to ask you something and I need you to not take it personally, I said. Why didn't you call us on the first? She started to answer, and then she stopped, and her mouth stayed open a little, and she looked out past me at the tree line, and she said, I don't know. Okay. She stopped again. I keep thinking I did call. I keep having the feeling that I already did this, that I already talked to somebody. Did anybody come out? No. Then you didn't call, I said in the voice you use, the calm one. It's all right. We're on it now. Here's the thing about that voice. I use it because it works. It settles people. It gets me information. It is a tool and I am good with it. But I have never once used it on somebody who was right and I was wrong, and had it come back on me later the way this did. I called it in from the truck on the way to Tanner's Fork. 3 overdue, 3 days backcountry, Sorrow Creek drainage. I gave dispatch the description info and asked them to spin up the county SR team and start the paperwork for a state police notification, because a 3-day overdue with a non-responsive satellite device is not a look around and see situation. Dispatch came back and said the county team was committed until at least 1800. They had a separate incident up in the north end of the district, a hunter with a fall. And could I do a hasty search on the trailhead in the first few miles? That's normal. That's how it goes in a district with our staffing and our geography. One ranger goes in fast and light, confirms the party is actually missing and where they entered, and by the time the real machine spins up, you've cut hours off the timeline. I said affirmative. I said I'd report back by 1700 latest. Tanner's Fork trailhead is a wide gravel pullout with a kiosk and a pit toilet and a registry box that maybe 1 in 5 parties actually signs. There were 4 vehicles. Dale's white Tundra was one of them. Backed in, cold to the touch. 3 days of pollen and grit on the hood and a dead sycamore leaf under the wiper. Ray's blue Forester was beside it. I noted the plates and photographed both. Then I did the thing that I want you to understand is completely routine, and that I have done maybe 200 times, and that I now do differently, forever. I walked around the vehicles looking at the ground. The pullout is gravel, and it doesn't hold much, but the edges do, where the gravel gives way to that grayish mud you get on a north-facing bank. And on the far side of the Tundra, on the driver's side, in the mud strip between the gravel and the weeds, there was a print. I'm going to describe it exactly, and I'm going to resist every urge I have to make it more than it was. It was maybe 14 inches long, It was barefoot in the sense that it had no tread, no lug pattern, nothing manufactured about it. It had a heel, a real heel, a narrow one, deeper than the rest. It had toes. 5 of them, if you counted the way you'd want to. But the 2 outer ones were long. Not proportionally long the way a foot's toes vary. Long the way fingers are long, with what looked like 2 joints. And the outermost one came off the side of the foot at an angle that made me think of a thumb. It was 6 inches deep in mud that my boot didn't dent. That's the part I keep coming back to. I stood next to it, 155 pounds plus a 30-pound pack, and I pressed down, and I left a mark you could barely see. I photographed it. I put my radio next to it for scale, because I didn't have a ruler, and I photographed it again. I have those photos. I've had 2 people look at them. One said bear, obviously, distorted by melt or by a second track overlapping. The other said, "That's a nice one. Where'd you get it?" in the tone of a man who assumed I'd made it, and when I said I'd made nothing, he stopped emailing me. There was only one. I circled out 50 feet in every direction. Gravel, weeds, road. 1 print and 1 strip of mud, pointed at the driver's door of Dale Furby's truck, as if something had come up out of the weeds and stood there for a while and then gone back. I remember thinking, in that flat way you think when you've decided not to think. And then I shouldered my pack and I signed the registry and I walked into Tanner's Fork at 12:20 in the afternoon with about 5.5 hours of usable light and a plan to be back at my truck before I needed my headlamp. I did not come back to that truck for 31 hours. Tanner's Fork Trail climbs. 2.5 miles of switchbacks through second growth oak and hickory up to the saddle below Hollis Knob. And then it drops, hard, 600 feet and under a mile, into the Sorrow Creek drainage. I made good time going up. On the descent, I started reading ground. There's a thing that happens to a trail after a party goes down it, and it lasts about a week in dry weather. Scuffs on the downhill lip of the water bars, pole tips, the particular way a fresh boot print pushes a crescent of duff forward. 3 sets, all the same age, all going down, no sets coming back. That's what I had. 3 down. Nothing up. At the bottom, Sorrow Creek runs east through a flat-bottomed hollow that's maybe 300 yards wide at its widest, walled on both sides by ridges that are steep enough that you don't casually leave the drainage. It is, and I mean this, one of the prettiest places in the state. Big hemlocks, the ones the adelgid hasn't gotten yet. Rhododendron so thick along the banks that in places the creek runs through a green tunnel. Moss on everything. Water the color of weak tea from the tannins, running over sandstone in a set of little step pools that are, in a normal year, full of brook trout. Cass's drainage, the one that had nothing in it. There are 2 designated campsites in the hollow, marked on the district map as SC1 and SC2. Dale's plan, per Hazel, had them at SC2, the upper one, about 1.25 miles downstream from where the Tanner's Fork Trail hits the creek. I got there at 2:15 p.m. I want to tell this next part carefully because the way I encountered it and the order I understood it in matters. The first thing I saw from the trail was color. Orange. Isaac's pack upright against a hemlock. Perfectly upright, no slump to it, like it had been set there by somebody who cared about how it looked. There was no food logic in that camp. The food was in the box, and the box was closed, and the box had not been touched. 3 people had been removed from a place, and the place had been left tidy, and the only thing disturbed was the wall of a tent that somebody had been sleeping against. I keyed my radio. Wilcox 411. Static. Not the crackly, breaking up static you get in a hole. A smooth, even hiss, like a fan. Wilcox 411, radio check. The hiss. And under the hiss, way under it, at the edge of what you could argue was there at all, a rhythm. 2 short, 1 long. 2 short, 1 long. I stood in the middle of that campsite with the radio at my mouth, and I listened to my own radio breathe. I switched channels. I tried the repeater. I tried simplex to any unit. I climbed 20 feet up the bank and tried again. Same hiss, same rhythm, every channel, including one that's just a National Weather Service receive band and cannot physically have a person on it. I turned the radio off. The birds were still going. That's what I want you to hold on to, because it becomes important later. At 2:15 in the afternoon, in that camp, the woods sounded completely normal. There was nothing there. Whatever had happened and gone, and the woods had gotten over it. I decided to work. I did a proper hasty search of the site and a 100-meter perimeter. Took me about 40 minutes. I found drag marks. 2 of them, both starting near the blue tent, both heading downstream and slightly upslope toward the base of the north ridge. Not the kind a body makes when it's pulled by the arms. Those go straight and they scuff wide. These were narrow and they were interrupted, 4 or 5 feet of drag and then a gap of 10 or 15 and then drag again. Like something being carried and set down. Like something being carried by a thing that had to keep adjusting its grip. Blood. 2 places. The first was on the hemlock trunk about 7 feet up. Not a spray, not a smear, a transfer, a handprint's worth of contact, though it wasn't a handprint. The second was a dime-sized drop on a rhododendron leaf 40 feet downstream. And then, when I got low and looked with the light at a raking angle, another and another, going the same way as the drag. And tracks. God, the tracks. Once I found the first one, I couldn't stop seeing them. That 14-inch shape, that long outer toe, in every patch of moss and mud from the fire ring to the creek bank. Pressed into a rotting log so deep the punk had squeezed out the sides. And on the creek bank, in the wet sand, a set of 4 in a row where I could see the stride. I measured it with my trekking pole and a piece of cord, and then I sat down. 11 feet 3 inches, heel to heel. Walking, not running. There was no push-off, no dig, no spray of sand. Walking, flat, the same weight in each print. I'm 5'6". My walking stride is about 2'4". A tall man's is 3 feet. I sat on that bank for a while with my hand over my mouth. And then, and I know how this sounds, and I've stopped caring how it sounds, I said out loud, to nobody, okay. Because there's a moment in this job where you either accept the ground or you argue with it, and if you argue with it, people stay lost. I had spent 10 years training myself to believe what the dirt told me over what I expected. The dirt was telling me something 11 feet of stride long had walked out of that camp carrying at least one person 3 days ago, uphill, on 2 feet. Okay, fine. Then that's what I'm following. Before I followed it, I went back for the notebook. Small, green, waterproof, a Write in the Rain, the kind you buy at any outfitter, the kind I have 4 of. Isaac's. His name was in the front cover in ballpoint, Isaac Deal, and under it, in the same hand, Grade 10 Earth SCI, Field Journal, Mr. Panel, a school assignment. A kid keeping a field journal for a science teacher because his mother's friend was taking him on a trip and his mother thought it might count for something. I sat down in one of the folding chairs, and I want to be honest, I sat in a chair belonging to a person I was searching for in his camp, and it felt obscene, and I did it anyway because my legs were shaking, and I read it. I've transcribed it below. I have not corrected the spelling. I have not fixed the places where the handwriting goes to hell. Where I can't read a word, I've put brackets. Sept 29. Mr. Panel said to write about observed conditions, so, conditions, my legs hurt. Mom is doing better than me, which is embarrassing. Dale is 55 and going up the hill like it owes him money. Trees, oak, hickory, some kind of pine. Dale says hemlock, not pine. Hemlock has flat needles, W, 2 white lines underneath. Checked. Correct. We came down into the creek valley. And honestly, okay, it's nice. It's really nice. There's like a green tunnel of rhododendron over the water. Mom got emotional about it, which is very her. Camped at the second campsite. Dale sent a message on his sat thing to Aunt Hazel. He does it every night at 8 because a schedule is a rescue plan. Weird thing for the journal since Mr. Pennell said note anything unusual. No bugs. Like it all. It's September and I haven't been bit once and there's no gnats over the water. Dale said dry year. Mom said don't jinx it. Sept 30. Layover day, meaning we don't move. Dale fished. Caught nothing. Says the creek should be stiff with brookies and it isn't, and he's grumpy about it. Observed conditions: 62 degrees, high overcast, wind from the west but you can't feel it down here. Went up the north side of the valley wise Dale to look for a spring he says is on the map. Didn't find the spring. Found a cave. Dale says it's not a cave. It's an adit, which is a horizontal mine entrance. There used to be a coal operation up this whole area like 100 years ago, he says. There's still a rail bed under all the leaves if you know how to look. He showed me. You can feel it with your feet before you can see it. It's flat and everything else isn't. The adit is about 5 ft high and mostly caved, but there's a gap at the top you could get through. Dale wouldn't let me get close. Said old mines have bad air and worse floors. He got kind of serious about it, actually. He's usually joking. On the way down, I asked him why there's no fish, and he said something I didn't get. He said, there's no fish because there's nothing to eat the bugs, and there's no bugs because there's nothing to eat the illegible. And then he stopped talking. Then at dinner, he was normal again. Unusual thing number 2 for Mr. Panel. Right at dark, I heard a whistle. Like a person whistling a tune. 2 notes down, 1 up. Not a bird. I know birds are basically all whistling. This was a person whistle. Mom didn't hear it. Dale heard it. Dale said, that's a titmouse. It was not a titmouse. OCT 1. I'm writing this at like 6 a.m. because I didn't sleep. Last night around 1 or 2 something walked around our tent. Not like an animal walking around. It walked in a circle. Like an even circle, all the way around, and then all the way around the other way, and it took a long time, like each step was really slow and really far apart. I woke Mom up. She listened and then she said, it's a deer. I said, deer don't do that. She said, go back to sleep. Then the whistle again. Right outside. 2 notes down, 1 up. Right at the corner of the tent by my head, like a foot away, and then again from way off up the hill like 100 yards, and there wasn't enough time in between. Then it did my mom's cough. I need to explain this. My mom has a cough. She's had it since COVID. It's this specific dry double thing, and I've heard it my whole life basically, and everyone in my family makes fun of her for it. Something outside the tent did my mom's cough. Perfectly. Twice. And my mom was lying right next to me, not coughing. I didn't sleep after that. OCT 1. Later. Dale wants to leave. He didn't say why, he said conditions, and looked at me when he said it like he was telling me and not Mom. Mom wants to stay because it's a 6-hour hike out and she has a blister and this cost money. They had an argument about it by the creek where they thought I couldn't hear. I heard Dale say, I've been coming here for 30 years. I heard him say, I know what it sounds like when it's the wind. I heard him say a word I'm not going to write down because writing it down feels stupid, and Mr. Panel is going to read this. They compromised. We leave in the morning. First light. Dale is going to do the sat message tonight and tell Aunt Hazel we're coming out a day early. Dale has been sitting facing the north side of the valley for like 2 hours. I asked him what he was looking at. He said, the rail bed. There were 3 more pages. The handwriting on them is different. Not different person different. Different hand different. Bigger. Pressed harder. The lines running downhill off the ruling. OCT 1 night. Dale's messenger doesn't work. He says it says sending, and then it says failed. And it's never done that. He says he can see satellites. The sky is clear. It should work. He turned it off and on like 9 times. Mom asked if we should walk out now in the dark. Dale said no. Dale said absolutely not. And the way he said it made Mom stop asking. He built the fire up way bigger than the other nights. He's sitting up with it. He gave me his knife. He said, you're not going to need this. Then why give it to me? No date. Same page. It's doing Dale's voice. It's out past the fire. Doing Dale's voice saying, Ray, come here. And Dale is right here next to me, holding my arm so hard it hurts. Mom won't stop crying. It did it 4 times, and each one is better than the last one. No date. Dale went out. He said he was going to walk to the top of the hill where the trail crosses and see if the messenger works up there. He said 20 minutes. He said if it's not 20 minutes, go downstream, not upstream, and don't stop. He took the fire with him. Like a torch, a big piece of hemlock burning on the end. We watched the light go up the hill, and it went up, and then it went sideways, which is wrong. There's no sideways there. And then it stopped. It's been an hour. I can see the fire still burning on the hillside. It's not moving. Nobody's holding it. Mom is packing. If somebody finds this. My name is Isaac Deal. I'm 15. My mom is Ray. We came from the cabin on Ivy Gap Ard. The thing that's out here is not a bear. I know what everybody's going to say, and it's not a bear. It sounds like whoever it's already got. That's the part. That's the part nobody's going to believe. It sounds like whoever it's already got, and it uses it to call the rest. That's the last entry. I sat in that chair with that notebook in my hands, and I looked at the north side of the valley, at the wall of trees running up to the ridge, and I thought about a 55-year-old man walking up there with a burning branch to get a signal, and about a light that went sideways. Then I did the thing that I think, in the final accounting, was the correct thing and also the thing that nearly killed me. I did not go back. I've been over it 1,000 times. I had a 2.5-hour hike to my truck. My radio was dead. The county team was tied up until 1800. If I turned around right then, I'd be at Tanner's Fork by 5, at cell service by 6, and a full search with a helicopter and 40 people would be walking into that hollow at first light on the 4th. First light on the 4th was 17 hours away, and I had a woman and a 15-year-old boy who had run downstream in the dark 2 nights before, and a man who was bleeding somewhere up on that north slope, and a drag trail going the same direction as the blood, and a mine at it that a kid had drawn a little map to in the back of a school notebook. 17 hours. I've read the after-action review. I know what it says about my decision. The man who wrote it has, to my knowledge, never had to make one. I put the notebook in my chest pocket. I checked my pack. 2 liters of water and a filter, a first aid kit that was better than standard because I'd built it myself, a bivvy, a puffy, a headlamp with fresh batteries and a spare, a knife, 40 feet of cord, my spot beacon, which I want to talk about in a minute, and the Glock 20 in a chest rig that the district lets us carry, and that I had, in 10 years, drawn exactly twice, both times at dogs. The beacon. I hit it. I hit the SOS on my personal spot beacon standing in that campsite at 3:04 p.m. on October 3rd, and I want that on the record, because for 11 months there was a version of this story going around the district in which I went in cowboy and told nobody. I hit it. It has a little light that blinks when it acquires, and a different light when it transmits. It acquired. It blinked green for 11 minutes. It never transmitted. I have had that unit bench tested by 2 different people. It works. It has always worked. It worked in my driveway the following week. 2 devices in 3 days. Dale's messenger and my beacon, both in that hollow, both looking at a clear sky, both failing to say a single word to anybody. I put it away, and I started up the north slope. The drag trail took me up through open hardwood for about 400 yards, and then it hit the rail bed, and Isaac was right. You feel it before you see it. You're going up a slope that has been going up for 10 minutes, and then, for about 8 feet, the world is flat. Then it goes up again. Once you've felt it, once you can trace it with your eyes. A faint terrace running along the contour of the hill, disappearing under a century of leaf litter and blowdown, coming back 100 feet on. Somebody laid narrow-gauge track through here around 1908 to pull coal out of a seam that ran out by 1930, and the company folded and the rails got taken up for scrap, and the mountain has been quietly eating the evidence ever since. The drag marks got onto that rail bed and turned east and stayed on it, which makes sense. It's the only easy walking on that whole slope, which also means the thing knew it was there. I followed it for maybe half a mile. The blood got more frequent, which is not what you want. Increasing blood means the source was still bleeding, means the source was still pumping, means alive and getting less so. Every few hundred feet I'd find a place where the drag stopped and there'd be a compression in the leaves, a body-sized dish, and the leaves would be scuffed in a wide ring around it. Set down, circled, picked up. I found Dale's messenger at the fourth of those. It was face down in the leaves at the edge of the dish, and when I turned it over, the screen was cracked in a spider web, but it powered on, and I'm not going to pretend my hands were steady when it did. It had messages in the outbox. 9 of them, all failed, all time-stamped the night of October 1st, from 9:47 p.m. to 11:52 p.m. The first 6 are the same message repeated. No signal on device. Attempting from Ridge. All well. All well. Even then, even with his hands shaking, that man typed all well, because that's what he always typed, and because if it went through, he didn't want Hazel to be afraid. The 7th, 11:31 p.m. H, if this sends. Something in camp. Taking Ray and Boy out at first light down creek. Do not send anyone in at night, daylight only. The 8th, 11:44 p.m. Do not let anyone come in at night. The 9th, 11:52 p.m. It's in the tree. I looked up. I want to describe the next 10 seconds correctly. The forest canopy on that slope is oak and hickory, 60, 70 feet, with the understory cleared out by the shade. You can see a long way through it, trunks like columns going up the hill, gray-brown, and the leaves just starting to go and the light coming through in that flat gold October way, and nothing. Nothing in the trees. Nothing on the ground. Nothing. And then the bird stopped. Not all at once, which is what I would have expected. In a wave. Somewhere upslope, way off, a whole conversation of chickadees and nuthatches and a distant crow just quit. And then the quiet came down the hill toward me, and I could hear it coming, could hear the leading edge of it. One bird after another falling out, closer and closer, until the last one, a wren about 30 feet to my right, cut off in the middle of a phrase. And then the woods were completely silent, and I mean completely. No wind, no leaf drop, no creek, and the creek was 400 vertical feet below me, and I'd been hearing it the entire time until that moment. I stood in the middle of a silence that had a shape, and something whistled. 2 notes down, 1 up. It came from about 40 yards upslope, and it was not a bird. And I have spent my entire life in these woods, and I know every bird that lives in them, and every bird that passes through them. And I want to say something about the difference because it's the thing I've never been able to make anybody understand. A bird whistle has no breath in it. Birds don't breathe out through a mouth. The sound comes from a syrinx down in the chest, and there's no lip, no tongue, no air across a gap. A human whistle has a hiss under the tone, a little smear of air at the front of each note. This had breath in it. It had a lot of breath in it. Low, the way a big man sounds when he whistles. And there was a slight roughness at the end of the 3rd note, the way the note goes when there isn't quite enough air left. Then, from about 150 yards to my left, along the railbed in a completely different direction, the same whistle, same 3 notes, same rough spot at the end. There was maybe a second and a half between them. Nothing crosses 150 yards of steep hillside in a second and a half, which meant one of 2 things. Either there were 2 of them, or it can throw it. I pulled the Glock. I turned so my back was to the biggest tree I could reach in 2 steps, a white oak about 4 feet through, and I put my back on it and I stood there with the gun in a 2-hand low ready and my heart going like a bird in a box, and I waited. For 11 minutes. I timed it after the fact off the messenger's clock and my own watch. 11 minutes of silence and nothing. And then, from perhaps 60 yards straight down slope, between me and the creek, between me and the only route out I knew. Wilcox, 411. My own voice, my own radio call, in my own voice in the cadence I use with the little upward hitch I put on the number because I picked it up from Cass 15 years ago and never lost it. I had said it 3 times, out loud, into a dead radio, in that campsite 40 minutes earlier. Something had been standing close enough to hear me and had kept it, and was now giving it back. I did not answer. I want to be very clear that not answering was the single hardest physical act of my life. There is something in a person, something older than language, that answers a voice. It is not a decision. It is a reflex, like a knee-jerk. And I had my grandmother's rule sitting in my chest like a stone, and I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, and I did not answer. Wilcox, 411, radio check. Then nothing for a long time. Then, much closer, 30 yards, maybe less, in the rhododendron along a little dry drainage cut, a woman's voice, exhausted, cracked, small. Isaac, honey, please. I closed my eyes, because that was the moment I understood the whole shape of the thing. It wasn't a trick it was doing at me. It was a lure, and it was a lure that had been assembled out of Ray Deal, which meant that at some point in the last 2 days, that thing had been near enough to Ray Deal to take it. And it was still using her, which meant she was worth using, which meant either she was still alive somewhere in these woods and it wanted her to come to it, or she wasn't, and it was fishing for whoever loved her. Either way, I was going the same direction. I stopped following the drag trail and started moving with my back to slopes and my eyes up. That last one is what saved me, and I want anybody who takes anything from this account to take that. Look up. Everything we're taught about tracking, everything about search, everything about predator awareness in this country is built around a ground plane. Bears are ground. Cats are mostly ground, and we treat the exception as exotic. We look for sign at knee height and below. We are, all of us, hardwired by a couple 100,000 years of not being tree-dwelling prey to search a two-dimensional world. The sign I started finding when I looked up changed everything I thought about the last 3 days. Bark scars. 10, 12 feet up on the uphill side of big trees. 4 parallel gouges through to the sapwood, weathered gray at the edges. Old ones. Some so old the tree had rolled callus over them, which means years, which means this has been going on for years. Broken limbs, thumb-thick, snapped downward 20 feet up in a line along the contour, like a path, and on a shelf of sandstone that came out of the hillside about a half-mile east of where I'd found the messenger, hanging from the branch of a chestnut oak that leaned out over the drop. The cache. I'm going to describe it, and then I'm going to stop describing it because I've found that the more detail I give, the less people hear. It was about 6 feet long, and it hung from a single limb by what I'm confident was braided grapevine. It was mostly bone. It was mostly deer bone, jaws, ribs, a lot of ribs, but there was other stuff in it. There was a length of nylon webbing. There was a mess kit lid. There was a pair of eyeglasses. There was a section of what I initially took for rope and did not take for rope on second look. And there was a strand running down the middle of small hollow bones, cut to lengths, hanging free. The wind came up while I was standing there. First wind I'd felt since the silence. And the whole thing spoke, not chimed. The bones knocked and the hollow ones took the air and made tone. And it made a sound like 6 or 7 people humming slightly out of tune with each other. And it rose and fell as the wind came and went. And I stood in front of it and understood that I was looking at an instrument. It hadn't made a decoration. It had made a thing that makes noise in the wind, and hung it where the valley funnels the wind. And the noise it makes is the noise of people. Somewhere below that shelf, a fox, I'm nearly sure it was a fox, barked twice and went quiet. And the cache had called it in. I got down off that shelf as fast as I safely could, and a little faster than that. And about 200 yards on, at the base of a rock rib where the slope kicked back, I found the adit. It matched Isaac's drawing. 5 feet of squared opening in the sandstone, most of it collapsed and filled with slabs, and a gap along the top left maybe 2.5 feet high and 4 feet wide, going back into black. Cold air came out of it. That's the thing about a mine. The air moves. A hole in the ground breathes in when the outside is warm and out when it's cold. And it was a mild afternoon, so that hole was exhaling, steadily, 48 or 50 degrees, straight into my face. The air coming out of it smelled like a rendering plant. I've smelled dead deer. I've smelled a dead bear in July. I've smelled twice a person. It wasn't that. Under the sweetness there was something greasy and burnt, like the smoke off a candle that's been snuffed with wet fingers like tallow, like the inside of a butcher's grease trap in a building that's also on fire. The rock around the gap was polished. That's the detail that will not leave me alone. Sandstone is rough. You can't shine sandstone by rubbing it a few times. That rock had a lip on it at the bottom of the gap, worn concave and slick as a door sill in an old church, worn by something going in and out and in and out and in and out, for longer than I want to think about. I stood in front of that hole and I did the arithmetic. Sundown was 7:04. It was 5:40. I had 80 minutes of usable light and about 2.5 hours of hiking between me and my truck. There was no version of this where I got out before dark. There was no version where I got help before first light. And there was, in front of me, a hole in a mountain with a worn door sill and a smell coming out of it, and 3 people missing, and one of them 15 years old. I turned on my headlamp and checked the spare and put the spare in my chest pocket next to the notebook. I put a round in the chamber. I found a rock about the size of a dinner plate and set it beside the gap where I'd feel it going in and out. And then, because I am my grandmother's granddaughter and because I have never in my life been able to make myself stop being polite to the woods, I said out loud, "I'm coming in for the people, that's all I'm taking." Then I went in on my belly. The first 20 feet were the worst 20 feet, and I say that having been through the rest of the night. You go in prone with a pack on and you cannot turn around. The gap runs back over a slope of fallen slabs and the ceiling comes down and the floor comes up and there's a place where I had to exhale to move forward. And my headlamp was 6 inches from stone and lighting up nothing but the grain of the rock, and behind me the daylight got small. And then the roof went away and I was in a room. Not a room. A drift. A mine passage cut by men with picks and black powder 100 years ago, maybe 7 feet high and 10 wide, going back into the hill dead straight with timber sets every 10 feet, most of them still standing, some of them not. The floor was a mix of rock and a fine black grit and it was dry as flour. I stood up. My headlamp threw about 40 feet of usable light, and the passage went past it. And the smell was so thick in there that I had to breathe through my sleeve. I went in slow. Gun in my right hand, light in my left, held out and away from my body the way you're taught, because a light held at your chest is a target with a heart behind it. 40 feet in, I found the first of them. I'm going to give this to you the way I got it, which was in pieces, because my light only showed me pieces. There was a shape on the floor along the left wall, long, low, wrapped. My first thought, my honest first thought, and I hate it, was sleeping bag. Because that's what it looked like. Something person-sized and person-shaped and bound up tight in a covering. It wasn't a sleeping bag. It was wrapped in something dark and fibrous that I took at the time for shredded bark and now believe was some kind of matted vegetable material. Moss and rootlets and grass, packed and layered and pressed down. And it had been there a long time. Years. There was nothing left in it but structure. There were 14 of them. I counted. I counted twice on the way in, and once on the way out, and I got 14 every time, laid along both walls of that drift like cordwood, in a rough order of decay. The oldest and flattest deepest in, the newest closest to the mouth. Number 13 had a Duluth pack frame beside it, canvas rotted off the wood. Number 14 had a green external frame pack sitting on top of it, and the pack was not rotted at all, and it was not even dusty. Dale Furby had been in that mine for 2 days. I checked him. I made myself. I put 2 fingers where the carotid would be through the packing, and there was nothing there and had not been for a while. And the temperature was wrong in the way that ends the argument. His right arm was not with the rest of him. I did not look for it. I said something to him, I don't remember what. Then I went deeper, because Dale was 14, and there had been 3 people in that camp. 200 feet in, the drift forked. Left went down at a grade and had water standing in it, black and still and going back further than my light. Right went level and dry and had, in the fine black grit of the floor, tracks. 14 inches, long outer toe, going both ways, dozens of times, a beaten path, and a drag mark, fresh, going right. I want to talk about fear for a second because I think most accounts of this kind get it wrong. Fear is not the thing that makes you want to run. That's panic, and it's a different animal, and I've only had it once later that night. Fear, the real, deep, sustained kind, is quiet. It slows everything down. It makes your hearing enormous. It puts a metallic taste in your mouth. and it makes you profoundly, ridiculously calm, because your body has decided that this is now a serious matter and has stopped wasting resources on the parts of you that have opinions. I was not brave in that mine. I was in a state where bravery was not one of the available options. I was a machine with a light on it going down a hole. At about 350 feet, the passage opened out into what I later learned is called a room and pillar working. A big chamber, maybe 60 by 40, with squared columns of unmined coal left standing to hold the roof. My light couldn't reach the far wall. The floor was thick with the grit and with bones, and I stopped trying to identify the bones after the first few because most of them were deer and elk and bear, and a very small number of them weren't. And I had a job. I stood at the mouth of that chamber, and I did the thing I had been putting off for 4 hours, which was to make noise on purpose. Ray deal. The echo came back wrong. It came back flat, the way sound does in a place with a lot of soft mass in it. Ray deal, my name is Wren. I'm with the Forest Service. I'm here to take you home. And from the far side of the chamber, from somewhere behind the third pillar, came a sound I will hear until I die. It was a whimper. It was a small, wet, exhausted, entirely human whimper, and it was the most beautiful noise I have ever heard in my life. And I went across that floor at a dead run with bones going out from under my boots. It wasn't a sleeping bag. It was wrapped in something dark and fibrous that I took at the time for shredded bark and now believe was some kind of matted vegetable material, moss and rootlets and grass, packed and layered and pressed down. And it had been there a long time. Years. There was nothing left in it but structure. There were 14 of them. I counted. I counted twice on the way in, and once on the way out, and I got 14 every time, laid along both walls of that drift like cordwood, in a rough order of decay, the oldest and flattest deepest in, the newest closest to the mouth. Number 13 had a Duluth pack frame beside it, canvas rotted off the wood. Number 14 had a green external frame pack sitting on top of it, and the pack was not rotted at all, and it was not even dusty. Dale Furby had been in that mine for 2 days. I checked him. I made myself. I put 2 fingers where the carotid would be through the packing, and there was nothing there and had not been for a while, and the temperature was wrong in the way that ends the argument. His right arm was not with the rest of him. I did not look for it. I said something to him. I don't remember what. Then I went deeper, because Dale was 14, and there had been 3 people in that camp. 200 feet in, the drift forked. Left went down at a grade, and had water standing in it, black and still, and going back further than my light. Right went level and dry, and had in the fine black grit of the floor, tracks. 14 inches. Long outer toe. Going both ways, dozens of times, a beaten path, and a drag mark, fresh, going right. I want to talk about fear for a second because I think most accounts of this kind get it wrong. Fear is not the thing that makes you want to run. That's panic, and it's a different animal, and I've only had it once later that night. Fear, the real, deep, sustained kind, is quiet. It slows everything down. It makes your hearing enormous. It puts a metallic taste in your mouth, and it makes you profoundly, ridiculously calm, because your body has decided that this is now a serious matter, and has stopped wasting resources on the parts of you that have opinions. I was not brave in that mine. I was in a state where bravery was not one of the available options. I was a machine with a light on it going down a hole. At about 350 feet, the passage opened out into what I later learned is called a room and pillar working. A big chamber, maybe 60 by 40, with squared columns of unmined coal left standing to hold the roof. My light couldn't reach the far wall. The floor was thick with the grit and with bones, and I stopped trying to identify the bones after the first few, because most of them were deer and elk and bear, and a very small number of them weren't, and I had a job. I stood at the mouth of that chamber, and I did the thing I had been putting off for 4 hours, which was to make noise on purpose. Ray deal. The echo came back wrong. It came back flat, the way sound does in a place with a lot of soft mass in it. Ray deal, my name is Wren. I'm with the Forest Service. I'm here to take you home. And from the far side of the chamber, from somewhere behind the third pillar, came a sound I will hear until I die. It was a whimper. It was a small, wet, exhausted, entirely human whimper, and it was the most beautiful noise I have ever heard in my life. And I went across that floor at a dead run with bones going out from under my boots. She was in a hollow at the base of the pillar. She was packed to the shoulders in that same fibrous material, and her arms were bound to her sides inside it, and her face was filthy, and one eye was swollen shut, and there was a wound in the meat of her left shoulder, 4 punctures in an arc that had been closed over with the same packing, packed into the wound, like a poultice, and I have thought about that more than I want to. It had kept her alive, not out of mercy, the way you keep anything alive. Ray, look at me. Her good eye came around and took a long time to find me. You're not him, she said. No, ma'am. You're not him. She started to shake. It does voices, it does. I know it does. Feel my hand. Feel that? A thing that does voices can't do that. She looked at my hand on her cheek for a while. Then she said, Isaac. Is he here? It took Dale. It took Dale on the hill and it came back and it... She stopped and her whole body went rigid and she said in a completely different tone, fast and low, We ran downstream. We ran and it came along the top and it was matching us. It was staying above us. And it started doing Dale and Isaac wouldn't. I told him don't answer. I told him, Ray, is Isaac here, in this mine? I don't know, she said. I don't know. It got me at the water. It got me at the water, and I don't know where he went. I got my knife and I cut her out. It took longer than it should have. That packing was dense as a horsehair mattress and my knife was sharp, and I was sawing at it while listening to a black chamber behind me with my headlamp aimed at my own hands. When I got her free, she couldn't stand. 2 days packed in that position. Her legs weren't hers yet. I got water into her, and half a bag of electrolyte powder, and I gave her one of the 2 ibuprofen and acetaminophen doses I had, and put a pressure bandage over the shoulder without disturbing what was packed in it, because the one thing I was sure of was that whatever was in there was the only reason she hadn't bled out on day 1. Can you get on my back? I can't. Ray, you can. It's downhill from the door and the door's 400 feet that way. You don't understand, she said, and she grabbed my sleeve with a strength I would not have believed. It goes out at dark and it comes back all night. It's been coming back. What time does it go out? She laughed. It was a terrible little sound. I don't have a watch. It's dark in here. It's always... And then, from the direction of the mine entrance, 400 feet up the passage, came the whistle, 2 notes down, 1 up, and behind it, without a pause, in a 15-year-old boy's voice, high and terrified and cracking, Mom, where are you? I have never in my life seen a human being do what Ray Deal did in that moment. She was 2 days into starvation and shock. She could not stand 30 seconds earlier, and she got her feet under her and started toward the sound. I got both arms around her from behind and pulled her down and put my hand over her mouth and held on while she fought me. She fought me hard. She bit the web of my thumb through the glove, and I have the scar, and I have never once been angry about it. That's not him, I said into her ear over and over, quiet as I could. Ray, that's not him, that's not him, that's not him. Mom. It took his voice from the creek. Ray, listen to me. It has his voice. That doesn't mean it has him. She went slack all at once, and the thing came into the mine. Here is what I saw. It is not much, and I'd give a great deal to have seen less. I killed my headlamp the second she stopped fighting. Total dark, the kind you only get underground, the kind where your eyes invent gray fog to have something to do. I got us behind the pillar, into the hollow it had made for her, and I put my back to the coal and Ray in front of me, and the gun over her shoulder pointed at nothing. You could hear it come the whole way. It didn't walk in the black. It went on all fours in there. I could hear 4 points of contact, out of rhythm, a long, short, like a horse at a walk. And there was a dragging sound with it, something soft over the grit, and every so often a click, hard and sharp, like a fingernail on stone. And it was making sounds the whole time, continuously, cycling. Isaac's voice, then the whistle, then a woman's cough. Huh, huh. Ray's cough, and I felt her convulse against me. Then a laugh, a man's, warm, 3 syllables, somebody's actual laugh from some actual day. Then a radio squelch, the exact 2-tone alert of a Forest Service repeater. Then a bird, a wood thrush, perfect. Then Isaac again. It went through them like somebody going through a ring of keys. It came into the chamber and it stopped and the sound stopped, and there was a stretch of silence maybe 40 seconds long in which I could hear Ray's heart. Not her breath, her heart. Then it started sniffing, and then it did the worst thing it did all night, and I include everything that came after. It said, in my voice, in a completely conversational tone, as though remarking on the weather, "I'm coming in for the people, that's all I'm taking." It had heard me outside. Of course it had. Ray made a sound. Not loud. Barely anything. A catch in the throat. Everything in the chamber changed at once. I heard it. Turn. The grit going under it. And the long, short came at us fast, and I brought the light up. I got about 1.5 seconds of it in a 200 lumen cone from about 15 feet. It was maybe 8 feet at the shoulder, in that 4-legged posture, and it was rising as I lit it, coming up onto the back legs, and it kept coming up, and the top of it went out of my beam before it stopped. The limbs were too long, and there were too many joints in them, and they folded the wrong way at the bottom, like a bird's, like a deer's, like nothing. It was gray-brown and hairless in patches, and the rest was covered in that same fibrous matting. And I could not tell you where the creature stopped and the packing started, and I have wondered ever since whether it grows that or wears it. The head was long and narrow and set forward off the neck, and there was too much jaw, and the jaw hung open, and there was a dark hole in the front of the face where a nose would be that opened and closed. And it had no eyes. I need you to understand that I looked. In that 1.5 seconds, I looked exactly where eyes go, and there was smooth ridged hide and a slight depression and nothing else. And it had come across a black chamber and put its head exactly where the sound was. And it did not need eyes, and that is why the whole thing works. It doesn't hunt with sight. It hunts with sound. It listens for a thing that answers. That's why the rules are what they are. That's why my grandmother's rules are what they are. Don't answer. I shot it 4 times. Center of what I could see, 4 rounds of 10 millimeters from 15 feet, and the muzzle flash in that dark was a physical blow. I blinded myself with my own gun, which is a thing that happens and which no one tells you about. It went over sideways. I heard it hit, and I heard it come back up, and I heard, for the first and only time, its actual voice. Not a roar, not a scream. It made the sound a large tree makes in the second before it goes over. That deep fibrous crack, that groan of something enormous coming apart along its own grain, and it went on for 4 or 5 seconds, and it came from something 10 feet from me, and I felt it in the floor. Then it went out of the chamber, fast, the long short, going away up the drift, and something knocking and clattering with it. And I stood there with my ears ringing and 40 feet of afterimage burned into my eyes and Ray Deal screaming into my hand. And I thought very clearly, it went toward the door. We had one way out. That's the arithmetic of a mine. I gave it 12 minutes. I timed them. I spent them getting Ray onto my back with a webbing seat I built out of the 40 feet of cord, a Swiss seat and a chest wrap and my pack straps taking the load, and getting her arms tied across my collarbone so she couldn't fall off if she passed out, which she did twice. She weighed maybe 130. My pack was 30. I am 5'6". I have never done anything harder, and I did it for 1.5 miles. We went up the drift. I kept the light off. I counted timber sets with my hand on the left wall. I'd counted them coming in without meaning to the way you do, and there were 31 from the fork to the daylight crawl, and I want to tell every person who ever goes underground for any reason, count something, count anything. It is the only thing you'll have. At set 19, I stepped on something that rolled, and my hand went out, and it went into number 14. At set 31, I found the slope up to the crawl, and at the crawl I found out what the clattering had been. It had brought rock. Slabs, the flat sandstone from the collapse apron outside, and it had pushed them into the gap, 3 or 4 of them, and left them. Not a wall. It hadn't sealed us in. It couldn't have. Not with slabs that size in a gap that size. It had narrowed the door to about 14 inches. I put my head against that rock in the dark with a woman tied to my back, and I understood the thing I've never been able to make anyone believe. It wasn't blocking the exit. It was building a choke point. It was making the hole small so that whatever came out of it had to come out slow, and one at a time, and blind, and head first. I sat down on the slope, and I did not move for a long minute. Then I untied Ray and laid her on her side and told her I needed 20 minutes, and she said the only funny thing either of us said all night. She said, "I've got nowhere to be." The slabs were heavy. 2 I could roll down the slope. The 3rd I had to break, and I broke it by levering it up with my trekking pole until the pole bent into an L, and then dropping a smaller rock on the raised edge, and it went in 3 pieces, and one of them opened up the back of my left hand, and I didn't notice until much later. Gray light came through the gap. Not daylight. Gray. It was past sundown, and into that long blue dusk you get in a valley, and I had been underground for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I put my face to the gap and listened for a long, long time. The woods were silent, all of them. No insects, no birds gone to roost, no wind, and in that silence, from somewhere out on the slope, maybe 80 yards, came a sound like something enormous breathing through a hole full of liquid. It was waiting for the door. I'm going to tell you what I did, and I'd like it understood that I only thought of it because of the bones on the shelf. I took off my pack. In it, among other things, were a stainless cookpot, a titanium spork, 2 aluminum tent stakes I'd been carrying for 6 years for no reason, a small emergency radio, the crank kind, weather band only, dead battery but a working crank, and a roll of medical tape. I made a noise machine. I taped the spork and the stakes to a length of cord so they'd knock against the pot, and I hung the whole assembly from a rhododendron branch on the outside of the crawl, about 10 feet to the left, reachable at arm's length from inside. I taped the emergency radio's crank handle so the crank would turn under weight, and hung a rock off it on a loop of cord, a rock I could drop with a pull on a second cord that would run the crank down slow and make a little dying whine of static. It's stupid. It's a Rube Goldberg made by a terrified woman with a headlamp in her teeth. It took me 9 minutes. Then I pulled Ray up to the gap and put my mouth against her ear. When I pull the second cord, you go and you don't stop, and you go downhill. Not down the rail bed, straight down the fall line to the creek and then downstream. There's a place about 2 miles down where the valley opens up onto an old strip bench. Bare rock. No cover for 400 yards. Get on the bare rock. Why? I didn't have a reason. That's the honest answer. I had a hunch built out of 100 small things. A cache hung where the wind funnels. A mine at it. 4-footed in the dark and 2-footed in the trees, no eyes, and every single track and scar I'd found all day in cover, under canopy, on a shaded slope. And not one single sign of it, in the open. Because it lives under things, I said. Then I pulled the first cord, and 80 yards of dusk was full of a pot being hit by cutlery. The response was immediate, and it came from the wrong direction. It had moved. It had been much closer than the breathing. It had been maybe 30 yards below and left, and I heard it go past us and up the slope toward the noise, 4-legged, fast, terribly fast. And I want to be clear that if we had simply walked out of that hole, we would have gotten 40 feet. I gave it 4 seconds. I pulled the second cord and the crank started its thin little whine, and I shoved Ray Deal out of a hole in a mountain and came out on top of her, and we ran. 2 miles. Downhill at night, off trail through mountain laurel with a woman who could not run holding onto my belt, and me half carrying her, and both of us falling. I have no idea how many times. I have a scar on my chin from a rock I never saw. We made the creek in about 15 minutes, and I put us straight into it. Water is loud. That was the whole thought. Water is loud, and it eats sound, and if the thing hunts by ear, then the middle of a creek is the quietest place in the woods. I don't know if that's true. I know we got 2 miles. It came with us. Of course it did. It stayed high. Just like Ray had said. just like it did to them. It ran the slope above us, on the north side, 30 or 40 feet up in the timber, and it did not try to be quiet. It crashed. It hit blowdown and went through it. It was above us the entire way, and it was, I am certain, hurting. And it talked the whole time. Isaac's voice, over and over from up on the slope. Mom, I'm hurt. Mom, I can't walk. Dale's voice. Ray, take the kid and go. I'll catch up. And mine, clean and calm and professional, from 30 feet above us in the dark. Ma'am, that's the job. Ray held onto my belt and made no sound at all. And I would like to say something here about that woman that I don't have the words for, so I'll just say it plainly. She had lost 2 days in a hole. She had a hole in her shoulder. Her son's voice was calling her from up the hill in the dark, over and over 20 feet away, hurt and begging. And she never once let go of my belt and never once answered. I have thought about that more than I have thought about the creature. At about 1.5 miles, the valley started to widen. The hemlocks fell off and gave way to scrub and then to that scraggly gray birch and sumac that grows on disturbed ground, and the creek ran out over flat rock, and then the trees just stopped. The Ivy Gap Bench, an 8-acre shelf of blasted, benched, contour-stripped rock that a coal company left in 1974, and that has never grown anything back but moss and a little scrub around the edges, because there's no soil on it, because they took the soil somewhere and never brought it back. The kind of scar you can see from an airplane. There was a moon. 2 days past full, coming up over the east ridge, and it lit that bare rock like a parking lot. I got us to the edge of the trees and I stopped. Straight out, I said. Middle, go. Come with me. I'm right behind you. And she went, hobbling, hunched, arms wrapped around herself, out onto that moonlit rock. And I stood in the last of the trees and turned around with the gun up because I had decided somewhere in the last mile that I was not going to have it come out of the woods behind her. It came down the slope. I heard it come, and I heard it stop. And it stopped inside the timber about 60 feet from me. And for a while, there was nothing. Then the whistle. 2 down, 1 up. Very quiet, almost gentle. Then Isaac. Mom. Then in my grandmother's voice. My grandmother, who died in 2011, whose voice that thing could not possibly have had. And I have no explanation for this, and I have stopped looking for one. And if you have one, I don't want it. Wren, come here, baby. I put 4 more rounds into the dark where the sound was. Then I backed out onto the rock. It did not follow. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people want most, and it's the part I know least. I don't know that it couldn't come out. I know that it didn't. I know that I stood 400 yards out on bare moonlit sandstone with Ray Deal sitting against my leg for the next 6 hours and 35 minutes, and that thing stayed in the tree line the entire time, and I could hear it moving along the edge, back and forth, the length of the bench, a circuit maybe 200 yards long, over and over, all night. It never stopped talking. Here's what happened to Isaac Deal, as best as it's been put together from him, and he does not remember all of it. The night of October 1st, when the thing came into the camp and Ray and Isaac ran downstream, they got separated at a place where the creek splits around a gravel bar. Ray went right. Isaac went left. Ray got as far as the second designated campsite, and the thing took her at the water, which she remembers as a sound and a weight and nothing else. Isaac kept going. Downstream, just like Dale told him. He walked, by his account, all that night and most of the next day. He went past the strip bench in the dark without knowing what it was. He followed the drainage as it turned south and got to a place where it crossed under a road. And he sat down under that culvert because it was concrete and it had 2 ends he could see. He stayed there for 2 nights. He says he heard his mother calling him the whole time, from up the bank at intervals, and he did not go up. He was 15 years old and he had written in a notebook 2 days earlier. It sounds like whoever it's already got. And he sat in a concrete pipe for 30-some hours and listened to his mother beg him to come out, and he did not come out because he had figured it out. and he had decided to be right about it, even if being right meant that's the last thing he'd ever hear from her. A road crew found him on the afternoon of October 3rd, while I was walking down Tanner's Fork at almost exactly the same hour, sitting at the mouth of a culvert on Ivy Gap Road, 6 road miles and 1 ridge from where I was standing in that campsite reading his handwriting. He'd walked out of the woods entirely on his own. The reason nobody had told Hazel yet is a chain of ordinary failures. He was a miner with no ID. He gave a cabin name instead of an address. He was hypothermic and not making sense, and the cabin has no phone and no cell service. And the sheriff's deputy who drove out to check it went to the wrong one, on the wrong spur. So while I was crawling into a mountain to look for him, he was in a hospital bed in Elkins eating red Jell-O. Ray found out in the ambulance. I found out standing in a gravel road with a foil blanket around my shoulders. I sat down on the bumper of a truck and put my face in my hands, and one of the SAR guys thought I was having a cardiac event. I went back in with them the next day. I had to. I was the only one who could find the adit. We recovered Dale Furby on October 5th. It took 9 people and most of a day and a litter and a rope system, and it was, from beginning to end, one of the most careful and decent things I have ever watched a group of human beings do. They also recovered over the following 2 weeks remains from 11 of the other 13. 2 were too far gone to be moved and were documented in place. Of the 11, 4 have been identified as of my writing this. The oldest confirmed is a timber cruiser from Nicholas County who was reported missing in 1961. 1961. That's what breaks me, in the end. Not the mine, not the voice, not the night on the bench. 1961, and a man's family who spent 60-odd years with a hole in them, and it was 400 feet inside a hill that 100 people a year walk over the top of. The official cause was recorded as a bear, specifically, predation, likely black bear, atypical. The report notes that black bear attacks are exceedingly rare, that food-conditioned bears in the region have shown increased boldness, and that the cache behavior and the use of a mine adit as a den site are unusual but not unprecedented. It does not explain what a bear was doing with 14 bodies over 65 years. It does not explain the tracks. There are photographs of 40 of them in the case file, and the report addresses them in one sentence. Track evidence at the scene was inconclusive due to substrate conditions. The substrate was dry mine grit and wet creek sand. It was the best substrate I have ever tracking on in my life. And there is nothing in it, anywhere, about the sound. I put it in my statement. I said it plainly, and I said it 3 times to 3 different people, and I have a copy of what I signed, and it's in there. And when the report came out, the entire sound section was gone. They didn't argue with me about it. That's the thing. Nobody has ever once argued with me. If somebody had sat me down and told me I was wrong, I'd have had something to push against. Instead, a man from the regional office shook my hand and told me I'd done an outstanding job, and that I should take as much leave as I needed, and use the word processing. And that was that. Ray Deal's statement says the same things mine does. Hers isn't in the report either. Isaac's notebook is in an evidence box. I photographed every page of it in the 2 hours I had it before I turned it in, and that's the only reason I could put it in here, and I've decided I don't care who that upsets. That's most of it. Here's the rest. Ray recovered. Physically. The shoulder needed 2 surgeries, and she doesn't have full rotation. She and I talk about 4 times a year. She lives in Virginia now. Isaac is 19. He's in his 2nd year at a school in Ohio, which, I've made my joke about Ohio already, and I'm not going to make it again, because I understand it now. He's studying acoustics. Not because of this, he'll tell you it's not because of this. It's because of this. Hazel never got her 3 days back. She stopped talking about it. Dale Furby has a bench with a plaque on it at the Tanner's Fork trailhead. His wife had it put there. It says he always came back for people, which is not a euphemism. He did it twice with the volunteer fire department before I was born. Sorrow Creek has been closed to overnight camping for 2 years now. The stated reason is resource rehabilitation. The 2 campsites have been decommissioned, the fire rings pulled, the sites seeded. The district map has been reprinted without them. Nobody made me do that. I asked for it, and the man from the regional office who used the word processing signed off on it in about 4 minutes without a single question, and that 4 minutes told me more about what the Forest Service knows than any conversation I've ever had. I still work here. People ask me why. It's the same answer as before, because of the morning on the bald with the fog in the valley, and because somebody has to be the one who knows where the adit is. I carry a bigger gun now, and a satellite messenger and a beacon and a backup radio, and none of that is why I feel safer. I feel safer because of 3 rules I keep on an index card in my truck and give to every new hire in this district, and they can put whatever they want in the after-action review. Don't answer a whistle you can't see the mouth of. If a voice you love calls you off the trail after dark, it isn't the voice you love. Look up. 2 more things, and I'm done. The first is that the Sorrow Creek drainage has been quiet for 2 years. Nothing missing, no sign, nothing. I go in there 4 or 5 times a season, in daylight, with a partner, and I have found exactly one thing worth noting. The cache is gone. Not fallen. Gone, grapevine and all, and the limb it hung from is broken. Something took it down and moved it. The second is that last October, the 6th, so almost exactly 3 years to the week, I was working the Cranberry Wilderness 41 miles north of Sorrow Creek by road, and about 22 as the crow flies, with a seasonal named Tolliver, who is 23 years old and from Pennsylvania, and who thinks I am a very intense person. We were 3 miles in on a maintenance patrol, clearing blowdown, and around 4 in the afternoon the birds quit, in a wave, coming down the hill. Tolliver stopped sawing and stood up and said, "Huh, that's weird." And out of the timber above us from about 60 yards, in a voice that had breath in it, something whistled 2 notes down and 1 up, and then, in my voice, my cadence, that little upward hitch on the number that I got from Cass Renko 15 years ago. Wilcox, 411. Tolliver reached for his radio. I put my hand on his wrist, and I did not let go, and I said very quietly, "We're going to walk downhill now, and we are not going to say one word." We walked 4 miles out and got in the truck, and I drove, and Tolliver kept looking at me, and I did not say anything until we were on pavement. Then he said, "Wren, what was that?" And I said the only true thing I've got. "It's not from here." He laughed a little. He said, "From here, like West Virginia?" I looked at him. "From here," I said. "Anywhere." Because I've thought about it for 2 years, every night, and I've read what there is to read, and everybody wants it to be an animal. An unclassified primate, a relict something, a surviving whatever. And they want that because an animal can be shot and mounted and put in a museum and made finite. An animal doesn't wait 65 years in a hole. An animal doesn't build a choke point. An animal doesn't listen to a woman say, "I'm coming in for the people," and then say it back to her, in her own voice, in the dark, because it has worked out that hearing yourself is the one thing that will make you stop breathing long enough to be found. That's not hunting. That's not instinct. That's cruelty. And cruelty takes an understanding of what the other thing loves. It knew what she loved. It knew what I loved. It had my grandmother. I don't know where it came from. I've stopped guessing. But I know it isn't a bear, and I know it isn't a relict ape, and I know that whatever made it to be good at exactly one thing, and got what it wanted. It's 41 miles north of where it was. It's moving, and it's hunting, and it's carrying a piece of me in its mouth. And if you're out in the Monongahela this fall and the birds go quiet all at once in a wave, coming down the hill toward you, and something out in the timber calls you by your name in a voice you'd know anywhere, do not answer it. Please. Walk downhill and get on the bare ground and do not answer it. It's been listening a lot longer than you have. The Pacific Northwest forests have a way of keeping secrets. I've spent 15 years as a park ranger here, learning their language of rustling leaves and hidden trails. My colleagues respect my work, but I'm still an anomaly. Senior Ranger Evelyn Patterson, the first woman to hold this position in the region. The scrutiny never quite fades, but I've learned to find solace in the wilderness, where the ancient trees judge only your respect for them, not your gender. At least, that's what I believed until the summer of 1968. Something was wrong with Claw Lake from the beginning. The air hung heavy that season, pressing down like a held breath waiting to be released. Temperatures climbed steadily past normal ranges, creating a persistent humidity that clung to skin and clothes alike. But the most alarming change was in the lake itself. Water levels had receded dramatically, exposing shoreline that hadn't seen daylight in generations. "Never seen it this low," I remarked to Mike Daniels, my deputy ranger, as we conducted routine water tests from our patrol boat. "Those caves along the northern shore should be completely submerged." Mike squinted toward the exposed rock formations. At 43, he was a decade my senior, with perpetually sunburned skin and haunted eyes that had seen too much in Vietnam. He wasn't the most reliable. His drinking had nearly cost him his job twice, but he knew these woods better than anyone. "Nature's way of showing us something new," he replied, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own optimism. Our equipment malfunctioned without warning that morning. The water testing device simply died mid-reading, its digital display flickering before going dark. "Must be a bad battery," Mike muttered, shaking the device as if that might revive it. I frowned, looking out over the unnaturally still surface of the lake. The water reflected the surrounding pines with mirror-like precision, appearing more like glass than liquid. A familiar sensation crept up my spine, the feeling of being watched. "It's not the battery," I said quietly. "There's something interfering." Mike shot me a skeptical look, but before he could respond, shouts echoed from the eastern shore. We turned to see a distraught group of campers waving frantically. 3 teenagers had vanished overnight. Their campsite was in disarray, tents shredded, sleeping bags torn to ribbons, personal belongings scattered across blood-speckled dirt. The damage pattern was unlike anything I'd seen before, not bears or wolves or any recognizable predator. The tears in the fabric were too precise, too deliberate. "Did you hear anything during the night?" I asked one of the remaining campers, a trembling boy no older than 17. "Just the water," he whispered. "It was moving, making sounds, like whispers." Sheriff Grant arrived an hour later with 3 deputies, his boots crushing evidence as he stomped around the scene. A stocky man with thinning hair and a perpetual scowl, Grant resented federal rangers operating in his territory. "Probably just ran off skinny dipping and got lost," he declared, dismissing my concerns. "Teenagers, you know. All hormones. No sense." I might have believed him if not for what we found along the shoreline, a series of strange circular depressions pressed into the mud. They formed a distinctive pattern, like something massive had dragged itself from the water, leaving behind perfect imprints nearly 3 feet in diameter. The marks led directly to the ravaged campsite. "You ever seen tracks like these?" I asked Grant, trying to keep my voice steady. His confident expression faltered. "Mountain lion," he suggested, though we both knew no mountain lion made tracks like these. The search for the missing teenagers expanded over the following days. Helicopters circled overhead while ground teams combed through the surrounding forest. But something felt wrong about the entire operation, as if we were looking in all the wrong places. "We should be focusing on the lake," I told Mike during a brief break. "That's where those tracks came from." "What exactly do you think is in there, Evelyn?" Mike asked, his voice lowered though no one else was within earshot. I hesitated, unwilling to voice the irrational thoughts taking shape in my mind. "I don't know," I admitted, "but whatever it is, it's been there a long time." That evening, locals gathered at the ranger station, offering assistance and sharing increasingly disturbing reports. A fishing guide described catching deformed trout with strange circular bite marks. An elderly couple swore they'd seen waves moving against the wind, forming patterns that resembled words. A child claimed the water had reached out and touched her. I cataloged each account, searching for rational explanations. But deep down, a terrible certainty was growing. Something was in Claw Lake. Something that shouldn't be there. Something ancient that had finally awakened. And as the electrical storms began rolling in the following day, severe, localized bursts of lightning cracking across clear skies directly above the water, I couldn't shake the terrible feeling that it knew we were looking for it. Joseph and Jacob Wright arrived at the ranger station 3 days after the teenagers' disappearance. The identical twins were members of the local Nisqually tribe and occasional volunteer wilderness guides. They stepped into my office without knocking, their usually calm demeanors visibly shaken. "We found these washed up on the northeastern shore," Jacob said, placing a cloth bundle on my desk. Inside were what appeared to be scales, iridescent, triangular objects, roughly the size of my palm. They shimmered with an unnatural blue-green luminescence despite being removed from water. "These aren't from any fish native to these lakes," I said, carefully lifting one to examine it closer. "They're not from fish at all," Joseph replied, his voice unnaturally quiet. "Our elders have stories about these. They belong to the Wanagiska." "The what?" "Water spirit," Jacob explained. "A demon that lives beneath Claw Lake. It sleeps for 50 years at a time, only waking when its nest is disturbed." I wanted to dismiss their explanation as superstition, but something in their expression stopped me. The Wright brothers weren't prone to exaggeration or folklore. They were practical men with college educations who balanced tribal traditions with modern knowledge. "These storms aren't natural," Joseph continued, gesturing toward the window where another electrical tempest was building over the lake. "The water is angry, it's been violated." "By what? The receding shoreline?" Jacob shook his head. "Time. It's been 50 years since the last awakening, 1918. A chill ran through me as I recalled the historical records I'd been reviewing. Unexplained disappearances around the lake dating back generations, all spaced approximately 50 years apart. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sylvia Monroe, a limnologist from the University of Washington, who'd requested permission to study the lake's unusual properties. In her late 30s, with prematurely graying hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers, Dr. Monroe wasn't interested in making friends or small talk. "The electromagnetic readings from this lake are off the charts," she announced without preamble, "and the water composition is anomalous." "Anomalous how?" I asked. "It contains compounds I can't identify, complex organic molecules that don't match anything in our databases." She set down a folder containing preliminary findings. "And there's something else. The sonar equipment detected movement at approximately 200 feet below surface level." "Fish schools," Mike suggested from his position near the door. Dr. Monroe's expression tightened. "Fish don't grow to 40 feet in length, Ranger Daniels." The room fell silent. I looked down at the scale on my desk, its edges now appearing more serrated than I'd initially noticed. "There's an emergency situation developing with one of the search dogs," a voice crackled through the radio on my belt. "Northeastern shore, handler requesting backup immediately." When we arrived at the shoreline, we found a German shepherd thrashing violently against its handler's restraints. The dog, normally one of our most reliable search animals, was frothing at the mouth, its eyes wild with terror as it struggled to escape the lake's vicinity. "He just went crazy," the handler explained, straining to control the panicked animal. "We were tracking normally when he suddenly froze, started growling at the water, then tried to bolt." As if responding to our presence, the lake's surface rippled unnaturally. The water moved in concentric circles that didn't match the wind direction, spreading outward from a central point about 50 yards from shore. "That's not natural," Dr. Monroe muttered, already setting up recording equipment. The sky darkened abruptly as another electrical storm materialized overhead. The air crackled with static electricity strong enough to make the hair on my arm stand on end. Lightning struck the center of the lake with a deafening crack, sending a shockwave across the water. "Everyone back from the shore," I ordered, my instincts screaming danger. We retreated to the tree line just as a bizarre phenomenon began. The water at the lightning strike point began to glow with the same blue-green luminescence as the scales, forming geometric patterns beneath the surface that pulsed rhythmically. "It's communicating," Jacob whispered beside me. That night, I found Mike standing at the edge of the dock behind the ranger station, staring intently at the water. He didn't acknowledge my approach, his body unnaturally still in the moonlight. "Mike," I called softly. "It's after midnight. You should get some rest." He didn't respond, continuing to gaze at the gently lapping waves as though hearing something I couldn't. When I placed my hand on his shoulder, his skin felt cold and clammy despite the warm night air. "The water is speaking," he murmured, his voice flat and unfamiliar. "It's been waiting for us, for me." Before I could reply, he began walking forward, stepping off the dock into the knee-deep water with deliberate, mechanical movements. "Mike!" I shouted, rushing after him. "Stop!" He continued moving deeper, the black water rising to his waist. I splashed in behind him, grabbing his arm and pulling with all my strength. The shock of the cold water seemed to break whatever trance held him. He collapsed against me, shivering violently. What happened?" he gasped, looking around in confusion. "You were sleepwalking," I lied, helping him back to shore. "Come on, let's get you warmed up." As we trudged back toward the station, I glanced over my shoulder at the lake. For an instant, I could have sworn I saw a massive shape moving beneath the surface, its outline illuminated by that same eerie glow. The following morning, Dr. Monroe's underwater research equipment captured clearer images of what lurked beneath Claw Lake. The sonar recordings revealed a serpentine form over 40 feet long, moving with deliberate precision through the deepest sections of the lake basin. "Its biological signature is unlike anything I've documented," she explained, spreading printouts across the conference table. "The creature generates its own electromagnetic field, strong enough to interfere with our equipment." "That would explain the electrical storms," I suggested. "And possibly the behavioral effects," she agreed. "The water contains unusually high concentrations of what appear to be psychoactive compounds. If these substances are affecting neural pathways, it could explain what happened to Mike," I finished. The deputy ranger in question was conspicuously absent from our meeting. He'd called in sick, the first time in 3 years, claiming severe migraines and disorientation. Later that afternoon, Jacob and Joseph discovered something even more disturbing while exploring one of the newly exposed caves along the shoreline. Ancient petroglyphs covered the walls, images carved into stone that had been underwater for generations. "These depict the Monongahela," Jacob explained as we examined the carvings by flashlight. "See how the human figures bow before it? Our ancestors left warnings." The central image showed a serpent-like creature with multiple appendages, surrounded by geometric patterns identical to those we'd observed forming in the water during the electrical storm. "What does this text say?" I asked, pointing to symbols etched alongside the images. "It's a warning," Joseph translated, his finger tracing the ancient script. "The water spirit demands respect or calls forth revenge. It sleeps beneath the sacred lake until wakened by disturbance of its nest. Those who hear its call belong to the water forever." "This isn't just a legend," Jacob said firmly. "Our people knew this was real." That night I stayed late at the station, combing through historical records from the region. What I found sent a chill through my body. Reports of disappearances around Claw Lake occurred in distinct patterns. Clusters of incidents in 1918, 1868, and earlier, all spaced almost exactly 50 years apart. The descriptions matched our current situation with eerie precision. Electrical storms, strange behavior from locals, and people vanishing without explanation. When I finally left the office well past midnight, the lake was unnaturally still, its surface reflecting the full moon like a perfect mirror. As I walked to my cabin, a sound stopped me in my tracks. A low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through my chest rather than reach my ears. I turned toward the water, suddenly overcome with an inexplicable longing to approach it. The sensation was powerful, a pulling deep within my mind that urged me toward the gently lapping waves. It took tremendous willpower to resist, to force my feet to continue toward my cabin instead of the shoreline. Inside, I locked the door and collapsed onto my bed, my heart racing. The hum continued, softer now but still present, like a distant call meant only for me. I pressed my pillow over my ears, but it made no difference. The sound wasn't coming from outside. My sleep that night was filled with vivid dreams of swimming freely in impossibly deep water, moving effortlessly through midnight blue depths, while something enormous and ancient watched with ancient intelligence. I woke, gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. The radio beside my bed crackled to life at dawn. "Ranger Patterson," Sheriff Grant's voice came through, unusually subdued. "We've got another missing person. Mike Daniels never made it home last night." We organized search parties immediately, focusing on the areas surrounding Mike's cabin and the paths leading to the ranger station. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. He had simply vanished. "I'm putting divers in the water," Sheriff Grant announced later that morning when our ground search proved fruitless. "If something in that lake took him, we're going to find it." "That's not a good idea," I objected, Dr. Monroe and the Wright twins nodding in agreement beside me. "Whatever's down there is responsible for 5 missing persons now," Grant interrupted. "I've got specialized equipment coming from the county, and we're dragging that lake whether you approve or not." Dr. Monroe pulled me aside while Grant made preparations. "I've been analyzing the water samples," she said quietly. "The compounds I mentioned earlier, they're multiplying, spreading through the lake like a parasite." "What does that mean?" "It means the lake is changing, adapting." Her expression was grim. "Every living thing that comes in contact with this water is being altered at a cellular level." Before I could process this disturbing revelation, Sheriff Grant's diving operation began. 3 deputies in specialized gear entered the water while Grant supervised from a motorboat anchored near the center of the lake. We watched nervously from shore as the divers disappeared beneath the surface. For several minutes, everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, the water erupted like a geyser, capsizing the sheriff's boat and throwing him into the lake. The surface churned violently, white foam tinged with the same blue-green luminescence we'd observed before. Grant flailed desperately, struggling toward shore while screaming for help. 20 yards from safety, his expression changed from panic to confusion. For a moment, he simply treaded water, staring at something beneath the surface. Then he was yanked under with such force that it created a vortex where he had been. He didn't resurface, neither did any of the divers. In the shocked silence that followed, Dr. Monroe's equipment began registering massive electromagnetic spikes throughout the lake. The water pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, more complex and widespread than before. "It's spreading," Jacob whispered, "growing stronger with each person it takes." That night, a violent storm unlike any I'd ever witnessed descended upon Claw Lake. Lightning struck the water repeatedly, creating a dangerous light show that illuminated the surrounding forest in flashes of blue-white brilliance. The winds howled with an almost vocal quality, as if the air itself was screaming. And through it all, that persistent humming continued, growing louder in my mind until it became nearly impossible to focus on anything else. Morning brought eerie calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind debris scattered across the shoreline, splintered trees, waterlogged equipment, and strangely, dozens of the iridescent scales we'd seen before, now littering the beach like discarded coins. Joseph burst into my cabin just after sunrise, his usual composed demeanor replaced by panic. "Jacob's gone," he said breathlessly. "He said he was going to check the caves again, but he never came back." My chest tightened at his words. "When did he leave?" "Last night, during the storm. I tried to stop him. He wasn't acting like himself. He kept saying he needed to see what was in the deeper caves, that he could hear something calling him." We gathered what equipment we could, flashlights, ropes, the handheld radio, and headed directly to the northeastern shore where the exposed caves were most accessible. Joseph remained uncharacteristically silent during our journey, his features tight with barely controlled fear. We found Jacob's diving gear neatly arranged at the entrance to the largest cave, mask, fins, and oxygen tank positioned as if he intended to return for them. The sight sent a chill down my spine. It was too orderly, too deliberate for someone in distress. "He wouldn't just leave his equipment," Joseph said, voicing my thoughts. "Something's wrong." I nodded, staring into the dark opening where black water lapped gently against stone. "Stay here," I instructed, strapping on Jacob's abandoned oxygen tank. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, call for help." Joseph hesitated before finally nodding. "Be careful, Evelyn. Whatever took my brother, it might be waiting for you, too." The water was shockingly cold as I waded into the cave, numbing my skin almost instantly despite the summer heat outside. I adjusted the diving mask and switched on my waterproof flashlight, its beam barely penetrating the murky darkness ahead. The cave tunnel descended gradually, leading deeper beneath the shoreline. The walls were coated with a slick, gelatinous substance that seemed to pulse faintly under my flashlight beam. Strange geometric patterns had been carved into the rock, or perhaps grown into it, as they appeared to be made of the same organic material coating the surfaces. As I swam deeper, the tunnel widened into a vast underwater cavern. My flashlight couldn't reach the ceiling or opposite wall, giving the impression of swimming through open ocean rather than a cave system. The water here was clearer, with that same bioluminescent quality we'd observed on the lake's surface during the storms. And then I saw it, the nest. It dominated the center of the cavern, a massive structure composed of hundreds of translucent, pulsating egg sacs. Each one was roughly the size of a beach ball, containing cloudy fluid and moving shadows within. They glowed with rhythmic patterns, the light intensifying and dimming in perfect synchronization across the entire clutch. Floating among them, suspended in the water as if in a trance, was Jacob. His eyes were open but unseeing, his body limp, yet somehow maintained in perfect position near the center of the nest. His skin had taken on an unnatural sheen, almost translucent in places, revealing darkened veins pulsing with the same rhythmic light as the eggs. "Jacob," I called through my mask, though I knew he couldn't hear me underwater. I moved closer, fighting the current that seemed determined to keep me away from the nest. As I approached, I noticed disturbing changes in Jacob's appearance. What I had initially taken for shadows on his skin were actually scales beginning to form, identical to those we'd found along the shoreline. Before I could reach him, an enormous shadow passed overhead, blocking what little ambient light filled the cavern. I froze, pressing myself against the cavern wall as my heart hammered in my chest. The creature descended slowly into the nest area, its serpentine body undulating with hypnotic grace. It was far larger than the sonar readings had suggested, at least 60 feet from head to tail, with a body diameter that could easily swallow a human whole. Its scales shimmered with that now familiar bioluminescence, forming complex shifting patterns across its surface. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. Large, pitch-black orbs set in a distinctly non-reptilian face, more reminiscent of a deep-sea predator than any snake or eel. They held intelligence, ancient and cold, as they fixed directly on my position. The creature emitted a low-frequency sound that vibrated through the water and directly into my chest. My thoughts immediately became foggy, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. Through sheer force of will, I managed to maintain consciousness, focusing on Jacob's face to ground myself against the creature's influence. "You're not taking me," I thought fiercely, gripping my flashlight tighter. The creature moved closer, its patterns pulsing faster as it examined me with those terrible, knowing eyes. As it approached, a memory surfaced from the depths of my mind. A childhood incident I had suppressed for decades. I had been swimming in Claw Lake as a 10-year-old, during another unusually hot summer. Something had brushed against my leg underwater, followed by a sharp, burning pain. I'd emerged with a distinctive crescent-shaped wound on my shoulder that never fully healed, leaving a silvery scar in the same pattern as the scales we'd been finding. This wasn't my first encounter with the creature. It had marked me long ago, had been watching me all this time. With trembling hands, I reached for the small pack secured at my waist. Inside was a block of dynamite we'd discovered near an abandoned mining site earlier that week. I hadn't planned to use it, had brought it only as a last resort, but now it seemed the only option. "I'm sorry, Jacob," I thought as I set the timer with numb fingers. The creature sensed my intention immediately. It lunged forward with shocking speed, its massive body twisting through the water with the precision of a living torpedo. I kicked hard, pushing away from the nest while clutching the dynamite. At the last possible moment, I changed direction, swimming directly toward the eggs instead of the tunnel. The creature followed, its jaws open to reveal rows of translucent, needle-like teeth. I planted the dynamite deep within the nest structure and pushed off with all my strength toward a small air pocket I'd noticed near the cavern ceiling. The explosion rocked the entire cave system. Even underwater, the sound was deafening, the shockwave powerful enough to slam me against the rock wall. The creature's scream of rage and pain reverberated through the water with such intensity that I felt my diving mask crack from the vibration. I barely remembered the swim back to the surface. My lungs burned, my ears rang, and every muscle screamed in protest. But the primal fear of what might be following propelled me forward through the darkness. I burst from the water gasping, pulling myself onto the muddy shore with the last of my strength. Joseph was there, his face pale with shock and relief. "Evelyn, what happened? Where's Jacob?" I collapsed onto the ground, coughing up lake water. "The creature," I managed between ragged breaths. "It has a nest. Jacob was changing." Joseph's expression crumpled. "Is he?" Before I could answer, the ground beneath us trembled. A low, rumbling sound rose from the water behind us, building in intensity until it seemed to fill the entire valley. "Run!" I gasped, grabbing Joseph's arm. "It's coming!" We raced through the forest toward the ranger station, branches whipping at our faces as the sound of churning water grew louder behind us. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, a presence of such ancient malevolence that it seemed to press against my mind like a physical weight. Dr. Monroe was at the station when we arrived, frantically gathering her research equipment. "What's happening?" she demanded, taking in our soaked, mud-covered appearances. "The creature," I said breathlessly, already moving toward the weapons cabinet. "It's coming ashore." I grabbed the flare gun, our most powerful weapon after the dynamite I'd already used, and loaded it with shaking hands. "Get to the truck," I ordered Joseph and Dr. Monroe. "I'll hold it off." "That's suicide, Evelyn," Joseph protested. "You can't fight this thing alone." "I'm not trying to fight it," I replied, checking the flare gun's chamber. "Just distract it long enough for you to get help." When he still hesitated, I added more firmly, "Go. Now." Reluctantly, Joseph and Dr. Monroe headed for the truck while I stepped outside, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain the creature could hear it from across the clearing. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. Only the steady drip of water from rain-soaked branches broke the silence. Then, from the direction of the lake, came a wet, slithering sound of something massive dragging itself across muddy ground. It emerged from between the trees with a terrible grace that defied its enormous size. In air, its true form was more visible, a hybrid creature combining features of serpent, eel, and something else entirely, something that had no place in the natural world. Its body glistened with moisture, scales shifting color from midnight blue to that eerie bioluminescent green as it moved. The creature lifted its head, those black, intelligent eyes fixing directly on me. It released another low-frequency sound that made my vision blur and my knees buckle. I fought against the mental intrusion, raising the flare gun with trembling hands. "Come on," I shouted, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "You want me? Come get me." I fired directly at its face. The flare struck just below one massive eye, exploding in a burst of red-orange light that made the creature rear back with a sound like tearing metal. Taking advantage of its momentary distraction, I turned and ran toward the waiting truck. Joseph had the engine running, Dr. Monroe already secured in the passenger seat. I dove into the back as the creature recovered, slithering toward us with terrifying speed. "Drive!" I screamed. Joseph slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The creature pursued us down the narrow forest road, its sinuous body weaving between trees with impossible agility. In the rearview mirror, I watched its glowing form growing smaller as we increased our distance, until finally, at the main highway, it stopped and slowly retreated back toward the lake. We didn't stop driving until we reached the county sheriff's office 20 miles away. By then, shock had set in, leaving me trembling and disoriented as we attempted to explain what we'd witnessed. Predictably, no one believed us. The official report listed Sheriff Grant and his deputies as victims of a diving accident. The missing teenagers were classified as runaways despite our protests. Mike and Jacob were simply missing persons, presumed to have been caught in the landslide that had partially collapsed the cave system along Claw Lake's shore. Within days, state officials had cordoned off the entire area, citing environmental hazards from the cave collapse. Water had drained from portions of the lake into newly opened underground channels, lowering the level even further and revealing more of the strange formations beneath. Dr. Monroe left a week later, taking her research materials and water samples with her. "I'm going to continue studying this," she told me privately, "but no one will believe what we saw, not without proof." "What about the samples? The readings?" I asked. "Science wants reproducible results, Evelyn, and right now, all we have are anomalies." She hesitated before adding, "Be careful. Whatever that thing is, it's not finished, and it seems to have a particular interest in you." Joseph stayed a bit longer, helping to salvage what remained of our equipment and clean up the damaged ranger station. But eventually, the grief of losing his brother became too much to bear. "I can't stay here," he admitted one evening as we sorted through Jacob's belongings. "Every time I look at the lake, I see him floating there, changing into something else." I understood. Part of me wanted to leave too, to run as far from Claw Lake as possible and never look back. But a stronger instinct kept me rooted to this place. The certainty that someone needed to stand watch, to remember what lurked beneath those dark waters. The government sent a new sheriff, new deputies, and even a replacement for Mike. They reopened limited areas of the park under strict supervision, keeping the lake itself off limits to visitors. Scientists came occasionally to study the unusual geological features exposed by the changing water levels, but none of them understood what they were really looking at. I stayed, accepting a position as senior advisor to the Park Service, a role that allowed me to maintain surveillance on Claw Lake while appearing to help with the environmental recovery efforts. I kept detailed records of everything: water temperature, electromagnetic readings, wildlife behavior patterns, anything that might indicate the creature was stirring again. 5 years have passed since that summer, and most people have forgotten the strange events at Claw Lake. The missing persons cases remain unsolved, filed away in dusty archives. Dr. Monroe publishes occasional papers on unidentified aquatic compounds, but never explicitly connects them to our experience. Joseph moved to Arizona, as far from large bodies of water as he could manage. But I remember, I watch, and I know it isn't over, because sometimes, in the stillness of night when everything is quiet, I can still hear that low-frequency hum vibrating through the air. And occasionally, when I check my shoulder in the mirror, I swear the crescent scar seems to glow with that same eerie blue-green luminescence. The creature is still out there, waiting beneath the surface. And somehow, I know it's watching me too. Patient, ancient, and hungry. Waiting for the next 50-year cycle to begin anew. Unless, of course, something disturbs its nest again sooner.